Welcome back to the program. Let's roll on. Just a reminder, there were no new wars when Donald Trump was president. No new wars. But here's Biden campaign co-chair J.B. Pritzker claiming that Biden is standing for peace while Republicans would stoke the flames of war.
When you think about the protests, it's Joe Biden that's standing for peace and a lasting peace at that. And it's the Republicans that, frankly, would stoke the flames of war in the Middle East. So we did see a protest at O'Hare this week. But I think you should notice that protesters were out and about across the country. And it was in Chicago where they ended that protest soonest.
If you could tell me the difference between the jokers in the Hawaiian shirts with the tiki torches at Charlottesville and the people literally calling for the death of Jews, I'm all ears. But again, no new wars under Trump. My next guest is the author of The Last Best Hope, A History of American Realism. John Hulsman, thank you so much for joining us.
Great pleasure to be here.
Who gives Joe Biden high marks here when it comes to Ukraine and Russia, Israel, Hamas, and the looming threat of China and Taiwan?
Well, no one. And the point about deterrence is that nobody believes Biden is serious, and nobody believes Biden will do anything. For Biden, a two-state solution are the states of Michigan and Wisconsin. He's worried about Arab Americans turning on him and losing Michigan. It's domestic politics first. He doesn't care about the rest of the world. The deal they just passed to give Ukraine more money is utterly shameful, which Biden has been calling for. It puts America last. The one thing that the Republican caucus wanted was to do something about the border. Nothing was done about the border, and instead we added $95 billion to our grandchildren's credit card. And there's no sign of the war ending. There's no theory of how the war ends from Biden. He's pleading with the Israelis on one hand. He's pleading on the other hand with Hamas. Nobody's listening to him. And the Chinese slowly and patiently gather their ducks together to make a go for Taiwan, utterly unimpressed by anything the United States does, far more impressed actually by what India and Japan are doing to band together to stop them. So we've been missing in action for all these years. And as you say, the thing about Donald Trump, and I live in Europe, people are constantly picking on him. And I just calmly say, name me the only president in the post-Cold War era not to start a new war. And when you mention his name, they look flabbergasted. We should be shouting this from the rooftops.
You know, our media is so derelict in its duty because there's a common denominator here. Trump sanctioned Russian and Iranian oil, right? Got the Chinese to the table on trade. Biden comes in, sanctions our oil industry, and lifts the sanction on Russian and Iranian oil. And then all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose. And nobody says, well, wait a second, there's got to be a connection to all this revenue coming into these two countries and their bad actions.
Well, and again, he doesn't understand because he's been a government worker all his life. He doesn't understand capitalism. If you sanction or stop Russian oil going to Europe, they have to sell this stuff. So all they're going to do is sell it to someone else. And sure enough, 2 weeks later, who did they sell it to? China and India at a very cut rate price for both of them. Not so great to give China, our number one competitor, cut rate energy forever while impoverishing our ally Europe. Again, you couldn't devise this, but this is a man who's never run a lemonade stand in the real world, who knows nothing about macroeconomics or capitalism, whose idea of foreign policy is to shake the magic money tree as though we don't have a $34 trillion deficit, as though our schools are in great shape, our roads are in great shape, our educational system's in great shape, and all the things that make for power for us go out the window. And instead he says, I've committed myself to Ukraine, without ever explaining how Ukraine are going to use this money, because he won't even let us audit where the money's going. Why? Because if we looked under a rock, we'd find a bunch of crawly things with one of the most corrupt countries in the world.
Let me ask you the tough question here. Iran doesn't seem to be backing down. We hear that neither side wants to escalate. I don't know how true that is, but the truth is Israel is a nuclear power. Nuclear weapons launches they're bad, right? I mean, they're bad. They're not good for for the environment. Not that I'm some huge environmentalist on Earth Day, but I know nuclear weapons aren't good. It would be so costly, the humanitarian cost of launching nuclear weapons into Iran. It could trigger something even wider with Russia or China. Do we really think we're at the point where Israel would launch a nuclear strike?
I think not, but the point is the Israeli government has to believe the United States are doing two things. One, we are supportive of them, but friends tell friends when enough is enough. You have to do both. No one believes that Joe Biden has any kind of relationship with either the Israeli generals or Bibi Netanyahu, as we've seen, let alone the Iranians. His whole play to the Iranians is we will buy you off. It's the continuation of Obama's foreign policy. And in fact, they're the same people running the policy who worked for Obama, Jake Sullivan, exactly the same guys. These are Obama staffers who believe in the nuclear deal with Iran as the one thing that Obama did. They're insanely wrong, but that's what they believe. And so the idea is you bring Iran in from the cold, you bribe them, you bring them in from the cold, and then you pivot to the Indo-Pacific. The problem with this grad school theory of Obama's is that Iran is not just another state in the region. It's a revolutionary power determined to upend Israel, the Gulf states, the Saudis, and the order that lets the rest of the world have cheap oil from there. You don't bring them in from the cold. You take them to the freezer, which is what Donald Trump did. You sanction them. You bring all the allies together, the Saudis, the Israelis, the Gulf states, the Egyptians, the Turks. You get them together. You keep them in the freezer, and that's how you do stability. But you don't reward revolutionary powers, or guess what? They behave like revolutionary powers. Joe Biden doesn't understand how states work. As Robert Gates, former Secretary of Defense, said, I've known Joe Biden for 30 years. I like him, but he's been wrong about literally every major foreign policy issue. This is a guy who worked for both Democrats and Republicans. I couldn't put it better myself.
And thinking I'm going to run out of time here, I'm a fan of Aesop's fables, The Farmer and the Snake. Taking the snake to your bosom to nurse him back to health. And as he strikes venom, you say, why would you do that? Because I'm a snake. And that's what I do, right?
Exactly.
Because
and revolutionary
that's
powers,
what I do.
Revolutionary powers behave like revolutionary powers. Exactly.
Exactly. Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure.
All right. Coming up next, you know it. You love it. It's your guilty pleasure, and it's mine. It's the gutter. And my final rant. We'll wrap it up next.